Hello, hello. I didn't post a video for the last week module before spring break, for the module before spring break, so hopefully everybody was good with that one. But I wanted to go ahead and just touch on the Appendix 2 especially, and hopefully you guys were able to find the appendix. You have to, when you're in Cengage, you have to go in and look at the full text option rather than like looking at each chapter, and then once you're in the table of contents for the full text, you can gain access to all the appendices in the textbook itself. So I wanted to spend some time on ethics because, for one, I think it's really important, obviously, that that you all are getting an introduction to ethics, this being your first semester, and two, there are some things I wanted to talk about that have to do with our on-campus time next week, which I'm very excited for, and hopefully you guys are too, but I am excited for it. So, and take some time to review the additional and supplemental readings that I put on this module for you as well. There's a good chance that we're going to be going over those documents whenever you guys are on campus too. So I just want you to have a heads up on all of that. And just a note about our time on campus quickly. So take a look at the syllabus and our schedule of this actual semester schedule, because within the content area for our immersive week next week, you're going to see the chapters that we're going to be covering and the topics that we're going to be covering when you guys are on campus. It's a lot of information, a lot of content. I implore you to take the time to read the chapters prior to Monday, obviously, prior to Monday getting on campus. There are going to be some things we think going on in the evening, not, just kind of social gatherings and whatnot. Hopefully you guys get to meet some of the other students, maybe some alumni, and certainly all the faculty members, so you can kind of get to know each other a little bit more and get to know us a little bit better. So don't rely on those evenings. Plus, you're going to be exhausted, to be quite frank. You're going to be really, really tired after a long day of sitting and listening to me lecture, listening to videos, and doing our counseling observations. So please don't rely on the evenings as your time to do all of the readings to prepare for this class for the immersive week. So go ahead and check out those chapters, do the readings prior to. Essentially come prepared. And if there's anything else, I'll post it in the announcements before you guys get on campus, but I'm sure you're going to be hearing from Dr. Glenn probably sooner than later about what to expect. So anyway, getting back to the topic at hand of ethics. So there are two major codes of ethics that at the end of the day and end of this program you are really going to be looking at and abiding by, one being the American Counseling Association and their code of ethics, the other being the Commission on Rehabilitation Counselor Certification, the CRCC, and their code of ethics. Both are updated very regularly, in all honesty. In the most recent updates to these codes of ethics, you will find information about technology and the application of technology within a counseling setting, even some references to social media and social media platforms and what we should and shouldn't be doing with those as counselors. They're living documents, meaning that what we see in a code of ethics from the early 2000s isn't exactly what we're going to be seeing now, because things change and society changes, and what we deem as acceptable and moral and ethical, our perception of those things changes over time, as it should. We're an ever-evolving society, and so these are living documents. Also, it means that they're not concrete. So these codes of ethics they simply just can't cover every possible scenario that you could ever come up against in your counseling profession. I mean, there's no way to imagine some of the things that happen that are, kind of lead to unethical behavior. And so, there are these guidelines for all of us to look at, and there are entities and bodies within ACA and CRCC where you can go and propose a potential ethical dilemma to people that know way more than I ever would about ethics and what to do and decision making, and you can say, this is the dilemma, what should I do about it? And there are supervisors that are there for that as well. So we all look to these guidelines for just that, to offer us kind of a clear understanding of what we should be considering when we're faced with a dilemma. or are faced with a situation. A dilemma seems so severe and serious, and really a lot of times the ethical dilemmas that come up and potentially strip somebody of a license or certification start out as just confusing situations, scenarios where somebody thinks they're acting in the best, with the best of intentions for a client or an individual or a family in some cases, and it ends up that that's not what happens at the end of the day. Ethical dilemmas are not always people having sex with their clients. I mean, they're just not. I mean, certainly that happens, and that's probably one of the clearer cut guidelines that we have. Don't have sex with your clients. But there are other guidelines, and especially for those of us practicing in rural areas, it can get really complicated when you're the only rehab counselor in your town that's practicing, and you know kids that you're working with, and you know the families, and they know you, and some of them have known you since you were born, and know your grandparents and your aunts and uncles, and everybody knows everybody because it's a small town. And I can tell you this actually does happen because I've had students that have literally been the only rehab counselor in their county practicing. And so you get some of these boundary issues that come up, and those are the dilemmas. Those are the situations that oftentimes can give us a lot of headache, and that we need to seek out supervision for, because sometimes we just don't know what to do or how to best address a situation. One of the biggest issues when we think about ethics is confidentiality. Sometimes clients will come to us and think, boy, I can tell this person anything I want to, and it doesn't matter what I say, they can't tell anybody else ever. And yes, to a degree, we are kind of the keeper of secrets. As counselors, I would say that's part of who we are. We are as people. Part of our personality traits is that people come to us to tell us things. We're easy to talk to. But there are limits to confidentiality, and these limits to confidentiality need to be explained at the very onset of a counseling session, right at the beginning, when you're working with a client. And in addition to that, they need to be revisited over time. If a client is coming to us that is, a child, if it's a family that you're working with, especially in those situations, that child, even if they're a teenager, needs to know, all right, if you tell us something that, we have to tell your parents, then we have to tell your parents. And here's the guidelines around that in my disclosure statement. And disclosure statements and informed consents are important for that reason, so that you're putting it out there and protecting yourself at the end of the day. You're CYA, right? So you want to make sure that you're letting the clients know where those boundaries are. Also, reflecting on the duty to warn. And there are certain laws that are surround kind of the duty to warn. If somebody tells us they are going to hurt themselves or going to hurt others, we have a duty to warn. And there are certain guidelines around this that have to do with state laws, and so it's always important to check on those as well. And I am positive that when you get into your ethics class, you'll be going much deeper into the limits to confidentiality. Dual relationships, like I said, for those that work in rural communities especially, or even not so much, you might be surprised, even if you're working in a larger area, a larger town, just because of how long you're working and the client population that you're working with, you may end up, having some of these dual relationships come up, and you have to address those appropriately. Is it in the client's best interest that I'm working with them? Am I the only counselor that can help this individual, or is there somebody else that can help? As counselor trainees, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to go ahead and do one of these lectures today, is to kind of prepare you for what will happen in our time together during the immersive week. There are lots of limits to confidentiality when you're role playing with each other in a classroom, and when you're working with volunteer clients, doing those mock counseling session videos that you're sending to me, whenever you're sitting there in a classroom with your classmates, and in group settings, this is kind of the same. You can kind of help clients understand what happens with confidentiality and the limits to confidentiality in a group setting by reflecting on your own experience in classroom. You would hope that your classmates aren't going to go out and spread, personal information about you to their significant others, friends, and whatnot. But there's no guarantee that that won't happen. You can only control other people so much. So if you are in a in kind of one of these counseling sessions, one of these mock sessions, there are limits to confidentiality. There are things that I certainly can't control, and there are things that you can't control in terms of what you may be sharing with your classmates and what they would then be sharing with others. So it's important to be aware of that. You know, if there are things that you would not be comfortable with other people knowing, then don't share it in our mock counseling sessions in class. That's my best advice to you. Just don't share it. You don't have to talk about it. Mock counseling sessions are just that, fake, right? They're made up to a degree. You know, sometimes things come up anyway, just naturally from talking to each other, but they're fake. And I'm not grading somebody that's being the mock client. You know, I'm looking at the mock counselor to see, you know, how that student is doing. And once you get into a practicum and internship, you know, we'll definitely go over more on those disclosure statements and video recording agreements and things of that nature. Kind of, you know, put that on the back burner in the back of your mind, but certainly there are limits to confidentiality that will come up even as you go through the program as a student. So when we're thinking about competence and what it means to be a competent counselor, you know, in my opinion and the way that I view counselor competence is that it's on a continuum. You know, I may feel that I'm competent in counseling from, let's say, a social justice perspective right now. That was kind of the topic of my dissertation. I've done a lot of extensive research on social justice issues and developing social justice competence, but I would not say that I am a fully competent counselor when it comes to addressing all issues of social justice, because I feel like there's always more that I can learn, and there's more that I can, the different ways that I can develop my skill set and my knowledge base around social justice. And so that can be applied to multiple different populations, every different population of individual that we might potentially counsel in the future. So what can we do when we aren't competent? Well, you know, when you graduate and you're in that first job and you have your first set of clients, I mean, there are certain areas that you won't be competent in. I mean, you know, you may be kind of marginally competent because we've reflected on things in classes, and we hope, especially in our program, we hope that we have trained you to be a competent counselor, but at the same time you're a novice counselor, you're a new counselor, and so there most certainly are going to be things that you need to do to develop your competence in working with different client populations. And how do we do that? By seeking out continuing education opportunities, by going to different trainings, by, you know, working within your agency and working with supervisors to you know, sit through maybe a group session and see how other counselors that have been working in the field for 10, 15, 20 years, how they practice and what their techniques are and how they address certain situations. Now, when it comes to boundaries, this is different than competence, right? So boundaries are reflecting on the services that we provide, and there are limits to the types of services that we can provide. We should not be practicing outside the scope of our knowledge area, outside of our purview. So we're not financial advisors for clients, although sometimes they will come to us with financial questions. We are not child psychologists. So if a parent is coming to us and asking us certain questions about their child, you know, medications and what to do and how to treat a child, we're not somebody's physician, we're not a doctor, we're not a surgeon. We are going to be aware of medical information because, you know, if you're working as a rehab counselor, you're working with people with disabilities, you're going to know about what their medical conditions are. But we're not a doctor in that essence, in that sense. So we need to be vigilant about maintaining those boundaries with our clients, and we also need to make our clients aware of the boundaries, aware of what we can and can't do. And a lot of times, especially in more traditional rehab counseling settings, you know, this will kind of all be outlined within that, you know, packet of information our clients get at the first day. You know, these are the things that we can do, these are the things that we can't do. And somebody working as a rehabilitation counselor, you know, in more of a vocational counseling capacity, one of those areas, those boundary areas, is for our clients to know that we're not a mental health counselor. We're not their mental health counselor. When I was working at Cigna and doing job placement and career development and getting people off long-term disability, I made my clients know and become aware of the fact that I was not their mental health counselor. If they had other issues that needed to be addressed from a mental health counselor standpoint, I would refer them to different agencies or counselors in their area that could help in that way. My goal was to work with them so they could achieve their goals, which were always related to finding a job, getting a job, and sustaining employment. And so the disclosure and informed consent statements can certainly include limits to practice and boundaries. So what happens when our moral and ethical values differ from our clients? And I think this is a really good topic to discuss early on in your all's career and in the program as well. And hopefully we could talk a little bit more about this whenever we're on campus together too, because we're living in a politically charged environment right now. Unless you've been living under a very heavy rock, you're probably aware of that. And when we have all these influences from social media and people are voicing their differences and their differences in opinion, our moral and ethical values, it's not a matter of if they will differ from our clients, it's a matter of when. When will we have the client that doesn't have the same views as we do, whether it be about politics or religion or sexuality, whatever it might be. Our clients' values and their opinions will differ from ours at some point. And we can't always refer to another counselor. And, when you hear about not being in ethics classes, when you hear about somebody not being competent to practice with a certain group of individuals, refer out to somebody else, that's not the best go-to. In some cases, it's not an option to refer somebody else out to another counselor. And so we have to really address what the issues are, where the discrepancies lie, and what we can do to address them. And we always should be weighing out the options. For one, let's say I, have a political viewpoint that's vastly different from my counselor, from my clients, right? So I'm the counselor. Let's say I'm a staunch conservative Republican, and my client is a liberal Democrat. So our political views differ. And let's say this comes up somehow in a counseling session. So what should I do as the counselor? So one thing to kind of ask yourself as the counselor, can my client handle a conversation about these differing views? If I bring it up that my viewpoint, my first personal viewpoint, differs from what they're saying to me, can the client handle that conversation? What potentially might be their reaction? And more importantly, what's the purpose of doing that? Will it be of any value to bring up our differences within the counseling relationship? Will it benefit the client to know that our viewpoints differ, in whatever way they might differ? Will it help them achieve their goal any more, any less? Is it relevant to the conversation? I had a conversation in my doc program with one of my fellow cohort members, who had an opinion about people being, very religious, and kind of bringing that into a job interview and saying, well, if somebody's going to be, super religious, I'm probably not going to hire them because I would be worried about the viewpoint that clients would have about our agency. And I said, well, you could say that, but on the other hand, if somebody's coming in and you don't have the same belief system as them, is it discriminatory? Possibly. It could be discriminatory. You need to take that into consideration. So if we're thinking about working with clients, let's say our clients, let's say we have a client who's a member of the KKK. You never know. And they've got tattoos that reflect that, and they're out there trying to get a job, and let's say you don't believe in kind of those core values of the KKK. So would it be appropriate to bring that up in a counseling session? Well, you could state your opinion maybe, but the more important thing is addressing how employers might view your client, and what will your client's reaction be to those potential employers. What if an employer asks about something in an interview, comments on a tattoo, asks about what their hobbies are, that is where the value could be potentially in that type of scenario. Not necessarily putting it out there that your views are different than your clients, but rather thinking about how your clients' views may affect their ability to reach a long-term goal. And so these are all things to consider whenever we're thinking about how our moral compass may look a little different than our clients' moral compass. And that happens. That's the nature of society. Okay, with that, I'll let you guys get to the discussion page and check again. This is like the fourth time I think I've lectured on ethics in general and put the code of ethics out there, but please review them, print them out. It'll be useful for you to have in the long term, both the ACA Code of Ethics and the CRCC Code of Ethics. So with that, I will leave you guys to this module, and I really do look forward to seeing you in a week or so, and safe travels, everybody.